If I had to pick a favorite tool in SeeSaw, which is pretty tough because they're all pretty amazing, I do happen to love the drawing tool. The drawing tool is a lot like Explain Everything or Educreations. It gives you a whiteboard, and the students have the ability to record an explanation or draw something and or label using this blank whiteboard. I just think it has a lot of flexibility, and I really enjoy using it in my classroom. The way we use it most often is in something I call a chalk talk. Now, I grew up with things called chalk talks, being you'd go up to the chalkboard and explain something using just chalk. And I still call them chalk talks, even though I have to explain to some students why I call them chalk talks. It's this idea that if you have a blank piece of paper in front of you and a pen, could you teach something to somebody? Through your drawings, through your words, could you explain to them an idea? And these are some examples of chalk talks. For example, on the upper left-hand side, I asked the students, this was simply as a warm-up activity, so it took about 10 minutes, to use the draw feature on SeeSaw to create a chalk talk explaining how enzymes work. Now, I did this screenshot just because I thought it was so adorable, using the flash. So this is the enzyme, and then obviously the student is talking about the active site, the substrate, the lock and key mechanism, and the effect of temperature and pH. We can see another example, if I click on this link, of how a student used this feature.
These are enzymes. This is an enzyme, and this is a substrate. This little guy is happy because he fits right in, but if there is something like temperature that makes it hotter, or there is a pH solution that affects the enzyme, then it's called denaturing. And when an enzyme gets denatured, it misshapens, much like the one here did.
And a nice feature is they can set up their whiteboard, they can draw something in advance, and then when they record, they can then draw additional information. Similarly, they could add labels in advance, or they could move those labels around as they're talking. But it gives a very flexible tool, and again, as a teacher, I'm really getting a sense of their level of understanding based upon their chalk talks. One of the best things I've heard from students is that they go back to their own chalk talks or to other people's chalk talks as a review. Here's another example of a student who did a chalk talk to explain how to name chemical compounds.
Okay, today we're going to talk about the rules of naming chemical compounds. First, to start out with ionic. The first one is potassium chloride. The reason why it's potassium chloride is because potassium has a plus charge, and chlorine actually has a negative charge.
So that would be an example where I asked the students to teach somebody else how to name chemical compounds. The middle example is a chalk talk about types of matter, where they wanted to use pictures and an explanation to describe the major classifications of matter. In the upper right-hand corner is an example of a chalk talk where they described how to do Lewis structures, and they in particular focused on this carbonate ion. So they described how to determine the total number of valence electrons, and then that the carbonate ion displays resonance. As I mentioned earlier, they can set up their whiteboard in advance. So this was a chalk talk I asked the students to do about how to determine formal charge. So this student set up their whiteboard in advance using a couple of different Lewis structures that then they could compare and contrast using formal charge. The drawing tool is a very flexible tool to allow students to demonstrate their learning.